Hello, my beautiful friends, and welcome back to part 2 of Egil Saga. King Audbjorn took the band of men he had gathered and went north to Moor, where he met King Arnvid and Solvi Chopper, and together they amassed great forces. By then, King Harold had arrived from the north with his forces, and the two sides clashed in the fjord near Solskjell Island. A fierce battle ensued with heavy losses on both sides. On Harold's side, the two earls Asgalt and Asbjorn were killed, along with two of Earl Haakon of Lade's sons, Grotgard and Herlaug, and many other great men, while King Arnvid and King Audbjorn were killed on the side from Moor. Solvi Chopper escaped by fleeing and became a great Viking, and often raided in Harold's kingdom, which was how he earned his nickname. Afterwards, King Harold conquered South Moor. King Audbjorn's brother Vaemund kept control of Fjordane province and became its king. This happened late in autumn, and King Harold's men advised him not to head south past Stat at that time. So Harold appointed Earl Ragnvald to rule north and south Moor and Romsdal, and returned to Trondheim, keeping a large band of men with him. The same autumn, Earl Atli's sons attacked Olver Hump's farm, intending to kill him. They had far too many men for Olver to fend off, so he fled. He went to Moor, met King Harold, and became one of his men, then went north to Trondheim with the king that autumn, and became close friends with him. He stayed with the king for a long time and became his poet. That winter, Earl Ragnvald travelled inland across Lake Arsjo and south to Fjordane, and received word about King Vaemund's movements. Ragnvald turned up one night at a place called Natsdal, where Vaemund was at a feast. He stormed the house and burned the king and 90 men inside. Cadi from Burrell joined Earl Ragnvald with a fully manned longship, and they went to Moor together. Ragnvald took the ship that King Vaemund had owned, and all the possessions he could manage. Then Cadi travelled north to Trondheim to meet King Harold and entered his service. The following spring, King Harold sailed southwards along the coast with his fleet, conquering the Fjordane and Fjalar provinces, and appointing his own men to rule them. He put Earl Harold in charge of Fjordane province. Once King Harold had taken over the kingdoms he had recently won, he kept a close watch on the landholders and powerful farmers and everyone else he suspected would be likely to rebel, and gave them the options of entering his service or leaving the country, or a third choice of suffering hardship or paying with their lives. Some had their arms and legs maimed. In each province, King Harold took over all the estates and all the land, habited or uninhabited, and even the sea and lakes. All the farmers were made his tenants, and everyone who worked the forests and dried salt or hunted on land or at sea was made to pay tribute to him. Many people fled the country to escape this tyranny and settled various uninhabited parts of many places, to the east in Jamsland and Helsingland, and to the west in Hebrides, the Shire of Dublin, Ireland, Normandy in France, Caithness in Scotland, the Orkney Isles, and Shetland Isles, and the Faroe Islands. And at this time, Iceland was discovered. King Harold stayed with his army in Fjordane and sent out messengers through the countryside to meet the people that he felt he had reason to contact, but who had not joined him. The king's messengers went to Kveldorf's and received a warm welcome. They told him their business, saying that the king wanted Kveldorf to go to see him. "He has heard that you are a man of high birth and standing," they said. "You have the chance to receive great honor from the king, because he is eager to be joined by people who are renowned for their strength of body and heart." Kveldorf replied that he was too old for going on fighting ships, "So I will stay at home now and give up serving kings." "Then let your son go to see the king," the messenger said. "He's a big and brave man. The king will make you a landholder if you serve him." "I don't want to be a landholder while my father is still alive," Grim said, "because he is my superior for as long as he lives." The messengers departed, and when they reached the king, they told him everything Kveldorf had said to them. The king grew surly, remarking that these must be arrogant people, and he could not tell what their motivation was. Olver Hump was present then and asked the king not to be angry. "I will go and see Kveldorf," he said, "and he will want to meet you when he knows how important it is to you." So Ulver went to see Kveldolf, and after describing the king's rage, told him he had no choice but to go to the king or send his son in his place, and that they would be shown great honour if they obeyed. He spoke at length, and rightly so, about how well the king repaid his men with both wealth and status. Kveldolf said he had an intuition that this king will not bring my family much good fortune. I won't go to meet him, but if Thorolf comes home this summer, it will be easy to persuade him to go and become one of the king's men. So tell the king that I will be friendly towards him and encourage everyone who sets store by my words to do the same. As far as acting on his behalf goes, I will maintain the same arrangement I had under the previous king, if that is what he wants, and then see how the two of us get along together. Ulver returned to the king and told him that Kveldolf would send him one of his sons, but that the more suitable one was not at home at the time. The king let the matter rest there. In the summer he crossed Sognefjord. When autumn came, he prepared to go north to Trondheim. Kveldolf's son Thorolf and Ivan Lam returned from their Viking expedition that autumn, and Thorolf went to stay with his father. When they were talking together, Thorolf asked about the business of Harald's messengers. Kveldolf told him that the king had sent word ordering him or one of his sons to join him. "What did you tell them?" asked Thorolf. "I said what I was thinking, that I would never join King Harald, nor would you or your brother if I had any say in the matter. I think we will end up losing our lives because of that king." "That is quite different from what I foresee," said Thorolf, "because I feel I will earn great honour from him. I'm determined to go and see the king and join him, for I know for a fact that there are nothing but men of valour among his followers. Joining their ranks sounds a very attractive proposition if they will take me. They live a much better life than anyone else in this country, and I'm told that the king is very generous to his men and no less liberal in granting advancement and power to people he thinks worthy of it. I've also heard about all the people who turn their backs on him and spurn his friendship. They never become great men. Some of them are forced to flee the country, and others are made his tenants. It strikes me as odd for such a wise and ambitious man as you, father, not to be grateful to accept the honour the king has offered you. But if you claim to have an intuition that this king will cause us misfortune, and want to become our enemy, why didn't you join the one you had sworn allegiance to and do battle against him? Being neither his friend nor his enemy seems to me the most dishonourable course of all." "My foreboding that no one would triumph in battle against Harold Tanglehair and more came true," replied Kveldolf. "And likewise it is true that Harold will do great harm to my kinsmen. But you decide what you want to do for yourself, Thorolf. I have no worries about your not being accepted as their equal if you join King Harold's men, or being a match for the best of them in the face of any danger. Just avoid aiming too high or contending with stronger men than yourself, but never give way to them either." When Thorolf was making ready to leave, Kveldolf accompanied him down to his ship, embraced him, and wished him farewell, saying that they should meet in good health again. Then Thorolf went north to meet the king. There is a man named Björgolf, who lived in Torger Island in Helgeland, a powerful and wealthy landholder who is descended from a mountain giant, as his strength and size bore witness. His son, Brynwulf, resented him closely. In his old age, when his wife had died, Björgolf handed over all control of his affairs to his son and found him a wife. Brynwulf married Helga, daughter of Ketilhang from Hrafnista. Their son Bard turned out to be tall and handsome at an early age and became a man of great accomplishments. One autumn, Björgolf and his son invited a lot of people to a feast, and they were the most noble of all those present. According to custom, they cast lots every evening to decide which pairs would sit together and share the drinking horns. One of the guests was a man named Hogni, who had a farm at Leka. He was wealthy, outstandingly handsome and wise, but came from an ordinary family and had achieved his position through his own efforts alone. He had an attractive daughter named Hilderid, who was allotted a seat next to Björgolf. They talked together at length that evening, and he thought the girl was beautiful. A short while later, the feast ended. The same autumn, old Björgolf set off from home on a boat that he owned, with a crew of 30 men. When they reached Leka, 20 of them went up to the farm, leaving the other 10 behind to guard the boat. Hogni came out to meet him at the farmhouse and greeted him warmly, inviting him and his men to stay there. Björgulf accepted the offer, and they went into the main room. After they had changed their sailing clothes for tunics, Hogni had vats of ale brought in, and his daughter served the guests. Björgulf called Hogni over and said, "The reason I have come here is to take your daughter home with me, and I will celebrate our wedding here now." Hogni saw he had no other choice than to let Björgulf have his way. Björgulf paid an ounce of gold for Hilderid, and he shared a bed with her afterwards. She went home with him to Torker, but his son Brynwulf disapproved of the whole business. Björgulf and Hilderid had 2 sons, Harik and Hrerik. Then Björgulf died, and when he had been buried, Björnrolf made Hilderid and her 2 sons leave Torger, and she returned to her father's farm at Leka, where she brought them up. They grew up to be handsome men, small but clever, like their mother's side of the family. Everyone called them Hilderid's sons. Brynwulf held them in low regard and did not let them have any of their inheritance. Hilderid was Hogni's heir, and she and her sons inherited the farm at Leka, where they lived in plenty. Brynwulf's son Bard and Hilderid's sons were about the same age. For a long time, Brynwulf and his father Björgulf had travelled to Finnmark collecting tribute. In the north in Helageland there is a large, fine island in Vefsna fjord called Alost, with a farm on it called Sandnes. A wise landholder named Sigurd lived there, the richest man in that part of the north. His daughter, Sigrid, was considered the finest match in Helageland. As his only child, she was his heir. Brynwulf's son's Bard set off from home on a boat with a crew of 30 men and sailed north to Alost, where he visited Sigurd at Sandnes. Bard announced that his business was to ask for Sigrid's hand in marriage. His proposal was answered favourably, and Bard was promised her for his bride. The wedding was set for the following summer, when Bard was to go back north to fetch his bride. That summer King Harald sent word to the powerful men in Helageland and summoned all those who had not yet been to meet him. Brynwulf decided to go and took his son Bard with him, and in the autumn they went south to Trondheim and met the king. He welcomed them and made Brynwulf a landholder, granting him revenues in addition to those he already had, as well as the right to collect tributes and trade in Finnmark and collect taxes in the mountain regions. Afterwards, Brynwulf returned to his lands, leaving Bard behind with the king's men. Of all his followers, the king held his poets in highest regard, and let them sit on the bench opposite his high seat. Farthest inside sat Audun the uninspired, who was the oldest and had been poet to King Harald's father, Halfdan the Black. Next to him sat Thorbjorn Raven, and then Ulver Hump. Bard was given the seat next to him and was nicknamed Bard the White or Bard the Strong. He was popular with everyone and became a close companion of Ulver's. The same autumn, Gveldof's son Thorolf and Ivan Lams and Akari from Burl came to the king and were well received by him. They arrived with a good crew on a 20-seater swift warship that they had used in Viking raids, and were given a place to stay in the guest quarters with their men. After staying for what they thought was a suitable length of time, they decided to go to see the king. Kari and Ulverhump accompanied them, and they greeted the king. Ulver told the king that Gveldof's son was there. "I told you in the summer that Gveldof would send him to you. He will stand by his promises to you, and you may now see as a clear token of his desire for full friendship with you that he has sent his son to serve you. A fine figure of a man, as you can see for yourself. Gveldof and all of us implore you to receive Thorolf for the honour he is due, and allow him to become a great man in your service." The king answered his request favourably and said he would do so, if Thorolf proves to be as accomplished as his brave looks promise. Then Thorolf swore allegiance to the king and joined his followers, while Kari and his son Ivan Lam went back south on the ship that Thorolf had arrived on. Kari went back to his land, and Ivan too. Thorolf stayed with the king, who gave him a seat between Ulver, Hump, and Bard, and they all became close companions. Everyone agreed that Thorolf and Bard were equals in terms of looks, physique, strength, and all accomplishments. Thorolf stayed there with the king, who was very well disposed to him and also to Bard. When winter passed and summer came around, Bard asked the king's leave to go to fetch the bride to whom he had been betrothed the previous summer. Once the king became aware of Bard's obligation, he gave him leave to return home. When his leave had been granted, Bard asked Thorolf to go north with him, rightly pointing out that Thorolf might meet many kinsmen of high rank there whom he had never seen or heard of before. Thorolf thought this was a good idea, so they both got leave from the king, prepared a fine ship and crew for the journey, and set off when they were ready. When they reached Torger Island, they sent men to tell Sigurd that Bard had arrived to claim the marriage they had arranged the previous summer. Sigurd replied he would keep every part of the bargain they had made, and they set the date for the wedding, which Bard and his men would go to Sandnes to attend. When the time came round, Brynolf and Bard set off, taking a great number of important people with them, their relatives by birth and marriage. As Bard had said, Thorolf met many of his kinsmen there that he had never seen before. They went on their way until they reached Sandnes, where a splendid feast was held. At the end of it, Bard took his wife home and stayed there for the summer, and Thorolf was with him. In the autumn they went south to stay with the king and spent another winter with him. That winter, Brynwulf died. When Bard heard he had come into an inheritance, he asked for leave to go home, which the king granted him. Before they parted, Bard was made a landholder, as his father had been, and the king granted him all the revenues his father had held. Bard went home to his land and soon became an important figure, while Hildred's sons received no inheritance, no more than they had before. Bard and his wife had a son named Grim. Thorolf stayed with the king in great honour. King Harald mounted a massive expedition, assembling a fleet of warships and gathering troops from all over the country, then left Trondheim and headed south. He had heard that a great army had been gathered in Agder and Rogaland and Hordaland, mustered far and wide from the inland regions, and Vik, with which many men of rank intended to defend their land against him. The king moved his forces down from the north, sailing in his own ship. Thorolf, son of Kveldolf, Bard the White, and Olver Hump, and Ivan Lam, the sons of Kari from Burl, were at the prow, while the king's 12 berserks manned the gunwales. They clashed in Havsfjord and Rogaland, in the greatest battle King Harald ever fought, and there were heavy losses on both sides. The king kept his ship to the forest in the thick of battle. Eventually, King Harald won the battle. Thorir Longchin, king of Agder, was killed there, and Gjotvi the Wealthy fled with all the men he had left who had not already surrendered. After the battle, when King Harald's troops were checked, many of them had been killed and others seriously wounded. Thorolf was badly injured, and Bard even worse, and none of the men from the fore of the ship came through unscathed apart from the berserks, whom iron could not bite. The king had his men's wounds treated, thanked them for the courage they had shown, and presented them with gifts, singling out for praise the men whom he felt deserved it, and promising them greater honour. He mentioned the skippers of the ships, then the men in the prows and others who had been aforeships. This was the last battle King Harald fought in Norway, for he met no resistance afterwards, and gained control of the whole country. Those of his men who had a chance of living had their wounds treated, while the dead were prepared for burial according to the custom of that time. Thorolf and Bard were laid up with their wounds. Thorolf's wounds gradually healed, but Bard's proved fatal. He had the king called in and told him, "If I should die of these wounds, I ask your leave to allow me to dispose of my bequest of myself." Once the king had agreed, he continued, "I want my kinsman and companion Thorolf to inherit everything, my lands and my goods. I also want to place my wife and son in his care, for I trust him best of all men for that task." With the king's permission, he sealed this arrangement as the law prescribed. After that he died and was prepared for burial and was greatly mourned. Thorolf recovered from his wounds and accompanied the king that summer and earned great renown. When the king went north to Trondheim in the autumn, Thorolf asked his leave to go to Halageland to take charge of the bequest which he had received in the summer from his kinsman Bard. The king granted him leave, giving him a message stating that Thorolf should take over everything Bard had left to him. The king's consent and will, and gave his tokens as proof. Then the king made Thorolf a landholder and granted him all the revenues that Bard had previously held, and the right to collect tribute from the Lapps on the same terms. He gave Thorolf a fine, fully rigged longship and sent him on his journey, as well equipped as he could be. Then Thorolf set off on his journey, and he and the king parted in great friendship. Thorolf was given a warm welcome when he reached Torger Island. He told the people there how Bard had died, and bequeathed his lands and goods and wife to him, stated the king's message, and offered his tokens as proof. Sigrid heard the news and took her husband's death as a great loss. But, since she was already well acquainted with Thorolf, and knew him to be a man of distinction and a good match for her, and since the king had ordered it, she and her friends decided that she should marry Thorolf if her father did not oppose the idea. After that, Thorolf took over all the duties there, including the king's tax collecting. Thorolf prepared to leave and had a longship with a crew of almost 60 men. When he was ready to sail, he set off along the coast to the north, arriving at a lost on Sandnes one evening. They put into harbour, and when they had put up the awnings and got themselves ready, Thorolf went up to the farm with a band of 20 men. Sigurd greeted him warmly and invited him to stay, because they had been close acquaintances ever since Bard had married into the family. Thorolf and his men went to the main room of the farm and stayed there. Sigurd sat down to talk with Thorolf and asked him if there was any news. Thorolf told him about the battle that had been fought in the south of Norway that summer, and that many people Sigurd knew had been killed. He also told him how his son-in-law Bard had died from the wounds he had received in battle, and they agreed it was an enormous loss. Then Thorolf told Sigurd about the arrangement Bard had made with him before he died, repeating the king's message of consent, and producing his tokens to prove it. Then Thorolf asked Sigurd for his daughter's hand in marriage. Sigurd took his proposal well, saying there were many points in its favour. It was the king's will, and also what Bard had requested, besides which he knew Thorolf well and considered him a fine match for his daughter. Sigurd consented readily, and the couple were betrothed, and the wedding was set to take place on Torger Island that autumn. Then Thorolf went back to his farm with his men and arranged a great feast there, and invited many people, including many of his high-ranking kinsmen. Sigurd arrived from the north, bringing a large longship and plenty of leading men with him. It was a huge gathering. It soon became obvious what a generous and great man Thorolf was. He kept a large band of men, which soon proved costly to maintain, and was difficult to provide for. But the farming was good, and it was easy to obtain everything that was needed. That winter, Sigurd from sadness died, and Thorolf inherited everything from him, a large fortune. Hilderid's sons went to see Thorolf and told him of their claim to their father Björgulf's inheritance. I knew Brynwulf well and Bard even better, Thorolf answered. They were men of such integrity that they would have given you the share of Björgulf's inheritance that they knew was yours by rights. I heard you make this same claim with Bard, and he did not sound as if he thought there was any justification for it. He said you were bastards. Haddock said they could produce witnesses that their father had paid a bride price for their mother. It's true that we did not approach our brother Brynwulf about the matter first, because that was still in the family. We expected nothing but honourable treatment from Bard, but our dealings with him did not last long. But now that the inheritance is passed on to people outside our family, we cannot completely ignore what we have lost. Our low standing might prove a handicap yet again, and prevent us from winning justice against you too, if you refuse to hear the witnesses we can produce to testify to our noble birth. I don't even consider that you have any birthright, Thorolf replied, testily, because I am told that your mother was taken by force and carried off to your father's house. At this point, they broke off the discussion. That winter, Thorolf went up to the mountains and took a large band of men with him, no fewer than 90 in number. Previously, the king's agent used to take 30 men with them, or sometimes fewer. He also took a great quantity of goods to sell, soon arranged a meeting with the Lapps, collected their taxes and traded with them. All their dealings were cordial and friendly, partly because the Lapps feared them. Thorolf travelled at large through the forests, and when he reached the mountains farther east, he heard that the Kilfing people had been trading with the Lapps there, and plundering too. He posted some Lapps to spy on the Kilfing's movements, and went off to seek them out. In one place he found 30 and killed them all without anyone escaping, then found a group of 15 or 20 more. In all, they killed almost 100 men and took enormous amounts of booty before returning in the spring. Thorolf went back to his farm at Sandnes and stayed there for some time. That spring he also had a great longship built with a dragon head on the prow. He equipped it lavishly and sailed it from the north. Thorolf harvested large amounts of provisions for himself in Heligoland, sending his men to catch herring and cod. There were also good seal hunting and plenty of eggs to be gathered, all of which he had brought to him. Thorolf never had less than 100 free-born men in his farm. He was generous and lavish with gifts and made friends with all the local men of rank. He grew very powerful and set special store by equipping himself with the finest ships and weapons. King Harold went to Heligoland that summer and was welcomed with feasts that were held both on his own lands and by landholders and important farmers. Thorolf threw a feast to welcome the king and spared no expense. Once the date of the king's arrival had been decided, Thorolf invited a large number of guests, including all the leading men. The king arrived for the feast with a party of almost 300 men, and Thorolf had 500. There is a large barn that Thorolf had fitted out with benches so that the drink could be served there, because he did not have a room large enough to accommodate that number of people. Shields were mounted all around the building. The king sat in the high seat, and when the upper and lower benches were both filled, he looked around, very red in the face. He did not speak a word, but it seemed obvious he was angry. Although it was a splendid feast, with all the finest provisions available, the king remained sullen. He stayed there for 3 days, as had been planned. On the day the king was due to leave, Thorolf approached him and asked him to come down to the shore, and the king agreed. Offshore lay the dragon-prowed ship that Thorolf had made, with its awnings up and fully rigged. Thorolf gave the ship to the king, asking him to respect his intention in having so many men at the feast simply as a gesture of honor towards him, not as a challenge. The king took this well and grew friendly and cheerful. Many people rightly added words of praise for the splendid feast and noble gift that the king was given on departing, and the great strength that he enjoyed in such men. They parted in friendship. The king went to Heligoland as he had planned, then back to the south as the summer progressed, and he attended other feasts that were held for him. Thank you, my beautiful friends.